If you want to know the secrets of existence and the true meaning of life, I can't help you. But if you want some book recommendations, why not try reading the ones I wrote? If you're a fan of giant monster mayhem and anime weirdness, why not try Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1? If horror is more your style, you can't go wrong with The Occult Mafia. Those who enjoy their fantasy with a dark twist may be interested in Emerald of Maddox City. And if you're interested in shared universes, why not read all three? Hop on down to the description for links to all three books on Amazon. Enjoy whichever ones you read, and enjoy the video. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni viewer, and it occurs to me that I'm 4 episodes in and I have yet to talk about the intro and outro for this series. That's one of the big draws of an anime, after all. You get really cool intro animation and sometimes some really cool outro animation. It varies. But I feel like I should say something about those two. In terms of music, they're both really good songs that they play. The first one is really rockin', and the second one's a bit nicer and more melodic, which, you know, that's typical for this kind of series. You want something that's full of energy and fast-paced in order to get you pumped for the action, and then to take you out, you get something a bit slower, a bit nicer, and I mean, that's pretty standard, but the songs themselves are still really good. And the animation for both the intros and outros look really good. As far as visuals go, though, I gotta say the outro has the intro beat. The intro isn't bad. I want to make that clear. The visuals they have for the intro aren't bad visuals. But the whole purpose of an anime intro is to give you an idea of what's going to be in the series. What's it about? What are you going to see? Things like that. You know, if it's a sports-based series, you expect visuals of the characters playing that sport at some point. If it's a fantasy series, you expect to see a lot of swordplay, a lot of magic using dragons and castles and stuff. If it's, say, a mecha series, you expect to see the mecha at some point. You expect to see them in some sort of action scene. Now, Godzilla Singular Point is a kaiju series, so you would expect to see certain kaiju involved. And it's not that they aren't there, but they're definitely not the focus of this anime. They go by so quickly in some shots that it's literally blink and you miss them. And in other shots where they appear, they are so tiny that they can't really be called the focus of these shots. And of course, because so many of them are drastic redesigns of the familiar creatures, you wouldn't necessarily recognize them as Godzilla monsters. I honestly feel like if I were to show that opening to someone completely devoid of context and ask them to guess what the series is based on that, they would have no idea. Again, I'm not saying the intro animation is bad or that the visuals are bad. I just don't know if it really represents a Godzilla-based series. Compare that to the opening for SSSS Gridman. That opening makes it very clear what you're going to see. You've got the visuals that show you the giant semi-mech, semi-toku-looking hero just towering over everything. You get to see the kaiju nice and plainly. You also get a lot of shots of the characters because it's a very character-driven show. But you look at that opening and you can tell, oh, this is going to be sort of an Ultraman-esque sort of series. But I don't really get that with the opening for Godzilla Singular Point. But the ending, on the other hand, the ending is chock full of kaiju imagery, like almost to the point where you might say it's too much. Not that you can have too much kaiju, of course, but it's got those clear, nice shots of the monsters, very well framed. It's got more references and Easter eggs to the movies than you could possibly catch on just one viewing. It looks really good, and it has a unique animation style to boot. So, if I were to choose between the two, intro and outro, the outro definitely is the better overall of the two. Again, I like the intro well enough, but the outro I feel is just a little bit stronger. But anyway, those things are not the main content of the series, so now that I've gotten that out of the way, let us move on to episode 4. or as I like to call it, the money-saving episode. I refer to it as the money-saving episode because this is the first episode in which I can clearly see corners being cut. First of all, it's the first episode in which the kaiju really don't do anything. If they are on screen, they're either dead, like that flock of Rodans that dropped dead in the last episode, or they're not really doing a whole lot, like what I believe was Manda surfacing by that fishing boat, or Anguirus looking at that one soldier. That's about all the kaiju stuff you're going to get. And it's not just there where the shortcuts were taken. There's also an extended period where Mei and Yun are having a conversation, but it's displayed entirely through a computer text message. And I get that's how they're communicating, of course, and they try to add some visuals in there to keep it from being boring, but that doesn't change the fact that for more than a minute, I think, you're basically looking at words appearing on a screen while you're listening to voices reading the words that are appearing on the screen. I mean, animation? And you know, I get it. A series like this, you want to save the money for when there's something really big happening on screen, so you've got to take places here and there to sort of cheat and use as little of the budget as possible. And this episode, I guess, was one of the places where they did that. We have that extended text stream, we have a lot of characters just sort of sitting or standing around. We have another media blitz, which is clearly recycled animation. I have a feeling those are here to stay, and that's going to be where they cheat the most, because it's always the same shots, it feels like, with maybe a few minor changes here and there. But otherwise, this is where you can see them saving money the most. Does that make it a bad episode? Well, it doesn't make it a great one. There are still important things being introduced, don't get me wrong. We get that new element that they've been building up to, which apparently defies all the known laws of physics and nature, and clearly that's going to be important at some point. We get several new characters, though they don't necessarily have that much to do as yet. We of course have Anguirus introduced at the end, I'll get to him in a moment. And we have Mei traveling to a new location, but what else beyond that? I guess another significant detail is that Yun is continuing to play 4D chess, but he seems to be doing so almost as an automatic response. There is that moment where he, for want of a better term, tricks one of the government guys to admitting that one of the buildings has the bones of a giant creature in the basement. He had no idea that's what was going to happen, of course, but he's been saying that he bases all of his stuff on predictions, recognizing patterns and whatnot, and he's doing this almost like it's just how he processes the world. And at this point, I'm not entirely sure if that is just how he does things and he doesn't really have a goal, it's just something he automatically does, or if he is actually trying to do something, if he is perhaps a chess master, if you will. Like I said earlier, I compared it to playing 4D chess, really complicated, he's 5 steps ahead of everyone else. For all I know, though, it's just the way he is. Which is possible as well. Whether or not that feels justified by the end remains to be seen. But I also feel confident in saying this is an episode where not a lot actually happens. This is like the second episode in a row where Mei is in transit. Last episode, most of her time was spent on a train. And now in this episode, most of her time is spent on a plane, and then in a car, and then sitting in a theater. So yeah, she didn't really do a whole lot, other than play that one word association game, which, actually, this is one of those parts where the dub is at a detriment. I unfortunately don't remember the name of the game, but if you've seen an anime, you probably have seen it before, where somebody says a word, the last character of that word has to be the beginning of the next word the other person says. You know that one. Except Mei's playing it by herself, trying to unlock this one code, which is not nearly as interesting, and moreover, it doesn't really translate into English. Because Japanese and English are such different languages, this particular game is impossible almost to translate into English, because the words that you could possibly go into in this sort of rapid-fire word association, they're pronounced completely differently and spelled completely differently, so you cannot do the same thing in English. This is one of those times where I feel almost like you would have been justified in altering the dub just a little bit. Not to the point where the intent of the scene is completely changed, but more just altering the source of it, because the whole point of an English dub is to make the series accessible to an audience that doesn't understand Japanese and doesn't want to read subtitles. And these people aren't likely to know certain things about Japanese culture. And yes, if you're watching something from Japan, you're looking to get something a little different from the norm, but if you completely are lost by what's being said or what's being shown, you know what, that's a bit of a rabbit hole, never mind. It's just one of those times where not a lot is happening with this episode. I don't necessarily want to call it filler. It's not that. There's still stuff that's going to be used later, but it doesn't really feel like it's enough. It feels like too many corners might have been cut, in fact. So many that the story itself wound up getting sacrificed along with everything else. I did say I'd get to Anguirus. Certain scenes in this episode are devoted to building up Anguirus' big appearance. And it's surprisingly atmospheric for something that's got a lot of bright, rich, natural colors in it. There's a lot of atmosphere leading up to that moment where we first see Anguirus in all of his glory. And even though he's only on screen officially for a couple of seconds, yet again, he displays far more personality than we ever saw in the Polygon trilogy or in Shin Godzilla. I know, I keep bringing it up, but it's inevitable. The way he's looking at that soldier, just through his body language, his general posture, the tilting of his head, the hint of expressiveness in his eyes, you can tell he's looking at this soldier and he's thinking. What he's thinking? Difficult to say at this point, because we only saw him for a few seconds. But still, that's more than we've ever seen out of Shin Godzilla, who just had these dead fish eyes and a body that moved like a plank of petrified wood. Or from Godzilla Earth, who just sort of slowly shambled, and it took him like 5 seconds to take a single step, if that. Anguirus, I have no complaints with how he was introduced, and I have no complaints with his design. Of the redesigns, he was the one I liked the most from the beginning. I felt like that was a good way to update the design without making him unrecognizable. I could look at that and still say, oh, Anguirus. So, again, no complaints there. I may be a little biased because I like Anguirus, but then again, why would you hate him? Other than that, though, really not much to say. Like I said, this is bordering on being filler. The first 3 episodes, it felt like you were watching someone set the pieces on the board, while moving a couple of them in a certain way that felt deliberate, but you didn't necessarily know how that movement would pay off. This episode, episode 4, feels like the player moved one piece and then got up to grab some snacks and maybe use the bathroom. Like he's taking a break almost. And yeah, it's not as interesting. It also has me wondering how slowly is the plot going to move. Like I said, I understand building up with a deliberate pace in these kind of shows. But again, I've seen too many anime that took their time to get to the point and then realized they suddenly had to rush and cram everything in all at once. I also remember watching the original Neon Genesis Evangelion, where they sort of had the opposite problem. They had so much plot at first that by the time they got to the end, they weren't able to actually do their finale, so they kind of had to wing something that was completely out of left field. I don't want Godzilla Singular Point to fall into either category. I don't want it to just rush to get the plot done all at once, but I don't want it to run out of time to actually finish its plot either. And this episode does make me wonder. I hope that we don't have that many more episodes like this. It's necessary this time, but if it keeps happening, that's gonna affect it in the long run. But we will see. That's about all I have to say about episode 4 at the moment. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. If you enjoyed what you just saw, hop on down to the description for links to Patreon, DeviantArt, and all of our social media, as well as links for Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, The Occult Mafia, and Emerald of Maddox City, 3 original novels I think you'll really enjoy. Thank you all, and we appreciate your support.